Hi, my name is Mark Walker. I'm the co-founder of the Fintech Power 50, and we're here at Innovate Finance Global Summit. And today I have Sam with me. Sam, maybe if you could just give us a quick introduction of your role and your company.
So Sam Seaton, I'm the CEO of Moneyhub, and we are on a mission to get everyone into the fields of financial wellness. And we obviously do that B2B business, so that's the way we feel we can reach the most consumers the fastest.
Fantastic. So let's jump straight in. Let's talk a little bit about the role that banks and fintechs have in sustainability and making a sustainable finance model. What are your sort of thoughts on that?
So incredibly excited for the fintech community, particularly the startups, because they're just laser focused about what's important for the consumer. You know, they live and die by the consumer, which means that, you know, the sustainable future is baked in because consumers want a sustainable future. The fintech community wants a sustainable future. That's kind of why they're doing what they're doing. So I think that's slightly at odds with what I call more traditional banks and the bigger enterprises and institutions, because they're coming from a place of we need to sell products quicker, faster. You know, that's their DNA, and it's such a challenge for those big organizations to make that leap into a very customer-centric proposition. So I would say that the fintechs have got the edge on, you know, having all that heart and soul, whereas the banks have got the customers. You know, you can't actually not have a bank account if you want to get paid. So they've got that hold, if you like, on the consumer. But I think they need more heart and soul to really build a sustainable future.
I guess from that sort of perspective, I guess most consumers wouldn't think of the traditional banks as being particularly sustainable. Obviously, they've been around for an awful long time. Various investments that, you know, various different banks have in fossil fuels and everything else have obviously been brought to light a lot. So, as you say, the fintechs have the edge. What do you think the key challenges are for the banks to try and sort of overcome that sort of perception and move forward?
So I think it's something that I learned on a holiday, you know, a long time ago when I was complimenting a hotel on how amazing it was. Like the service was, you know, spot on. You know, it wasn't intrusive, but it was nice. And I just thought it was a lovely place that I couldn't quite understand how they could get their entire staff to be just perfect. So I remember having the conversation with the maitre d' at some point, and he said, "Oh, where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, from the UK." And he said, "Oh, well, that's why." And I'm like, "What do you mean that's why?" And he said, "Well, in the UK, you put money first. But here we put the customer first and the money follows." I thought that is very interesting. So do you think the banks can put the customer first and know that the money will follow?
No, they definitely can't,
So
because their whole business model is based on securing deposits and utilising that money in other ways, isn't it?
So there's an underlying issue, which for me means that it's possible they will end up as utilities.
It's kind of interesting. You could argue the same thing for fintechs, with valuations being very much based on users rather than profit. And so is that actually a sustainable business, would be the other argument, is that the banks at least have a sustainable business model that they can continue to trade. But are fintechs coming under fire for not having sustainable business practice as well?
Well, I'm going to take you back to maybe 2002 and the dot-com, you know, bust. And it's like, you know, you look back then, and a lot of those businesses that were coming to market were ahead of their time, weren't they? So I think we have to accept that, you know, we too, in this great transformation, will see some businesses possibly ahead of their time, and, you know, through maybe no fault of their own in terms of what they're trying to achieve, you know, don't get to the other side. So I think that is just normal. But I think what we've got to hold on to is how many boards back in 2004, 5. We're getting very cross about all the spend on online shopping, which the techs and those teams would have been doing, and wanting more budget to do, you know, make online shopping better for one person that enters the online shop when they've got thousands of people in the shop. We should be spending our money here, shouldn't we? You know. But those that actually had the foresight to keep spending money on their online service, you know, I would argue, where are they now? And that's a sustainable future again, isn't it? I mean, you know, unfortunately, it's not about standing still.
Yeah, and obviously nobody really knows exactly what the future will be, but there's lots of indications that way is forward. And as you say, the fintechs, because they've kind of been born with the idea of the consumer in mind starting off, that's why they're able to be a little bit more agile, do you think?
Yeah, it's their heart and soul.
It's a really interesting area, and I think that kind of feeds into some other key themes that we've been seeing here at the summit, which is around collaboration and how it's the time for the ecosystem to come together and to move forward. So do you think that along with that sort of sustainable future, the banks and the fintechs could find some way of collaborating together to move forward?
I would like to think so, and I'm sure we will see pockets of it, but it's tricky for the banks because they are incredibly risk averse, and by our very nature, even me as a CEO, I would say we're incredibly, risk takers. We're the other end of the spectrum, aren't we? And so it's not a natural fit, really, is it, in terms of our DNA? But I think there are places in the banks where they will. I mean, without a doubt. But do I see it as being huge and going to be transformative for the fintech community? No, I think where that's going to happen is from outside the banking sector. So where I see, the open finance, open banking, honestly being eaten up, if you like, is once the retail world, the utilities, the telcos, the retail sector, their appreciation of what they can do with embedded finance, once they've got their head around it, there will be no stopping them. I mean, no stopping them. Yeah. So, all I would say is just watch them motor on away, because they live and die by the consumer. That's how they survive. And so they're very good at picking things up and running with them. And that's where I think the real challenge is going to come from for everyone. I mean, the fintechs will obviously enable the servicing of them, but really as a wider financial services sector, I think we should be more worried about what's coming from a place that has never had access to this type of information before.
It's kind of interesting that you sort of mentioned that about embedded finance, because I was going to ask you about sort of key market trends. Obviously that's been quite at the forefront for the last sort of year or two. Do you see that as being a key trend that's going to continue, and how do you see that developing as we move forward?
Well, I definitely think it's the future. We haven't even seen what can happen yet, and we've got to take it step by step. But what's amazing is the ability to, I'm going to take Vodafone, to be able to actually do their own credit assessment on their customers themselves with the help of a fintech, and actually help that customer from here to here get what they need instantly, one journey, thumbprints, all done, bought, paid for, done. I mean, quite Amazon-like, right? And I think that's what we have not understood, is that we are enabling any company to be, the Amazonification, if you like, is what I think we call it, of any sector. And I think we haven't seen it yet, but once it comes, it will come very fast.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that sort of, people have very different names for it, tailor-made banking propositions and everything else, but it's really the idea of putting the consumer first and acting on what they want. So I was going to come on to sort of request to pay. How does that sort of feed into that sort of consumer journey, in your opinion?
Well, to me, don't you think it's amazing that we can actually have a plumber turn up to someone's house, fix the tap, and then request to pay, get paid, and leave? And actually, as he's gone out the front door, the money's in his bank. And not only is the money in his bank, I don't know if you know, but with the traditional forms of payment, 3 o'clock on a Friday, they stop. They start getting into your account again on Monday at 9 o'clock. So between 3 o'clock on a Friday and 9 o'clock on a Monday, if you do anything, whether you are a beautician, a hairdresser, a plumber, electrician, it doesn't really matter what you do. McDonald's, selling burgers, it doesn't matter. You'll see none of that money. Whereas you imagine if actually all of that money keeps coming. You do something on a Saturday morning, money's in your account. I think the time to get paid for what you do when you do it, should be possible, and request to pay enables that beautifully.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and obviously without giving my age away, from many times when actually banks stopped, and you kind of like, okay, so no more money's going to come into my account for the whole weekend, so I've got to make sure I've got enough on Friday that will get me through the weekend. But now with sort of faster payments and instant payments, you're kind of getting used to the fact of, okay, I'm going to send you some money, here's the money.
Yeah.
Why can't we extend that out? And I guess request to pay is the kind of the first start in that new process.
Yeah, and it's not going to stop. So my real challenge to everyone is that if you are not adding value in the chain, you're going to be out. So unless you're adding value in that chain of command, if you like, from here to here, in terms of the provider and the consumer, there's not going to be any need for you. So that value add has got to be quite demonstrable to the consumer ultimately. And if it's not, I really think we're seeing the intermediaries just being, literally, they're not needed. And I think it's incredibly exciting for the consumer. Explicit consent, no longer going to actually have data flying around that you have no idea where it's gone, and no ability to ever get it back or put it back in its box. No, it's just gone. So those days are gone. And then secondly, just the ability to get things the way you get most of your other things that you do in life. I think it's financial services is finally having to catch up.
I was going to say, it almost feels like the financial services industry has been sort of mothballed for a certain amount of time, and now we've been building all these different little bits of products over the last 5 years or so, even 10 years, that we're now at a sort of a really interesting sort of grow up point where actually you can now have all those services. I guess the question is how are the traditional banks going to react to this? How are they going to be able to, will they survive? Do they become correspondence banks? What's their role in this sort of new future?
Well, my view, which, obviously I'm very happy to be challenged on, but I think where we're heading, and I don't know how long it will take, maybe I won't be around to see it, I have no idea. But my real view is that where we'll end up is with what I call institutional banking. Because actually, if you think about it, the difference between an institutional bank and what the consumer wants, that gap is narrowing all the time. So my view is that we'll end up with the institutional kind of banking element. But I'm not sure, in between there and the consumer, I think the landscape could look incredibly different to what we're seeing today.
Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of interesting. I don't want to keep you too long because you're a very busy lady, obviously. I was going to just end on the last one. When we sit here, which hopefully we will do this time next year, what are we going to be talking about?
What are we going to be talking about this time next year?
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about open finance and the fact that you can see all your pensions in one place.
Okay, very interesting.
Yes.
On that bombshell, I think we'll end the interview. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you.